Satan, if I win, Clinton wins. And Jesus says, not if I can help it. So the meme suggests, like, Hillary's on team Satan, Trump is on team Jesus. And I'm like, this is the kind of thing they were pushing out there. And it's like, show me, find me one, even a single swing state, battleground, independent voter who was swayed by that to pull the lever for Trump instead of Hillary. No. You can't.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking about a new GOP investigation into the FBI, Trump's policy struck down in court, Hillary Clinton's favorite conspiracy collapses, and a campaign against Jordan Peterson. Let's jump in. Hey Brad, it's been
tough day for you, right?
It has been a very no good, awful day for me. Very bad indeed. Phoenix is at the hospital as we speak. He apparently ingested something. Not exactly sure what. I have some guesses. I have some very good guesses because he loves to eat any and all plants, dirt, rocks. I found a cardboard box chewed up under my bed this morning. So either way, he's been vomiting and having some bowel movements for the past 24 hours. So I freaked out this morning because he got kind of lethargic. Took him to the hospital. They've ruled out parvo, but he's there overnight for some fluids. I'm feeling very sad, very stressed. So everybody say a little prayer for Phoenix. Hopefully.
Well, we will. But I'm pretty sure he'll be okay. Dogs, their stomachs are very resilient. Reggie has eaten a lot of things, including a large volume of poop.
Yeah, Phoenix says that too. My dog trainer has been particularly comforting for me because I've just been beating myself up and she's like, don't worry about it. This happens. We're going to work with him on Leave It. Like, it'll be okay. But I've been feeling very bad about my mothering skills. This is one reason I never wanted to have kids because I just like, oh my gosh, if I'm this stressed over my dog, can you imagine if I had a child and they were ill? Like, I don't know how people handle it. I really don't.
Yeah.
Ugh. All right. Well, anyways, I saw that you had another big win for your soccer team, which is
No,
exciting.
you read it wrong in the doc. A big L.
Oh no. Sorry.
So we won our
very
first game last week, and then last night we got our butts kicked a little bit. We lost 7-3, but it was against like a really good team, probably the best team in our division. So I'm not beating myself up too much about it. We'll try again next week.
You can't win them all. That's a pretty high score for a soccer game, isn't it? Aren't they usually
It is, but indoor is only 6v6, so you get and it's a smaller field, so you get higher scoring. It's more similar to hockey than it is to 11v11 full field soccer, where you're right, a typical score would be like 2-1 or 3-2. But on indoor, because it's a much smaller field, you get many more opportunities to shoot and score goals. So they've got more like hockey type score lines typically.
Interesting. Well, you might have had an L, but we got a win out of Congress this week. If anybody has somehow avoided the whole drama going down around the Speaker of the House, I'll fill you in, but there was a small number of GOP holdouts in the House when it came time to vote for a new speaker. Kevin McCarthy was the front runner, but this small group did not like Kevin McCarthy. They were calling themselves Never Kevins, which I just think is kind of funny. And basically they held out through like 15 rounds of voting, which is ludicrous. That is absolutely crazy. And a lot of people were mad about this. They thought it made a huge spectacle. And it kind of did look ridiculous, but they ended up getting some pretty interesting concessions in the process because in order to get the votes to be speaker, McCarthy had to basically guarantee a lot of things that we haven't seen in the House for a long time.
My favorite one, before we get to the main thing, is my favorite one they got was a guarantee of 72 hours between them releasing a bill and the text and a vote. Because if you remember, when they do these 4,000-page omnibus bills, then they say, all right, the vote's in 6 hours. They're voting to spend trillions of dollars, and they haven't even read what they're voting on. So just that tiny little concession right there, for me, makes all the chaos worth it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what he had to give away.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought it was awesome. Justin Amash has done a great job calling attention to just how little power the average congressman has and how much it really is just sort of a bread and circus show for the people to make it look like the representatives are doing anything other than fundraising. But they're really not. They can't offer amendments on the House floor, haven't been able to under the past couple of administrations. They don't get time to read the bills. They're often just told how to vote by leadership. And you used to need a certain number or percentage of Congress people to basically bring the speaker into to basically see if he could stay speaker. Now it's down to only like one, I think, that they got. So they did get several cool concessions out of this that I think are excellent, because we have seen too much concentrated power in party leadership. So I actually thought this ended up pretty good. And another thing that we got was there is going to be an investigation into the FBI and other intelligence agencies. As the National Review reported, the Republican-controlled House is set to vote this week on a resolution to form a judiciary subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, including law enforcement and national security agencies. It's going to be led by Representative Jim Jordan, and it was negotiated as part of the Speaker showdown. So I'm amped, because I hate the intelligence community. I think it is rife with abuse, and I really am. I mean, this is going to be kind of partisan. Like, I wish they didn't have Jim Jordan over it. I wish they maybe found somebody who's a little bit less far right, somebody who had some good favor with the left, because this is something that the left should be hype on, right? They talk about criminal justice reform. They talk about these abuses of civil liberties. Everybody should want to look into the FBI and what these intelligence agencies have been doing, both in the present day, but also historically. We know there's been a ton of corruption. So I'm really excited. Even though it's going to be partisan, I think we could find out some interesting things, and I'm hoping that somehow it becomes a bit bipartisan as it progresses. But I wrote an article this week for Base Politics, basically talking about the two top things that I hope they look into under this investigation. I think you are in agreement with me on these, so I want to go through them. The first thing that I really want to see them cover are the Department of Justice and the FBI investigating concerned parents at school boards as violent threats. And I think if you've been following Base Politics for a while, you know we reported on this pretty heavily when it happened. Last summer, the National School Boards Association sent a letter to the Biden administration labeling parents who were protesting at school boards about things like COVID policies and CRT curriculum as domestic terrorists. And in response, the Attorney General Merrick Garland basically directed the FBI to investigate the parents, and even reportedly made use of counterterrorism tools in that investigation. And then they tried to lie about it and say that they did nothing of the sort. So it was a huge circus last summer. I was mad about this, because, I mean, talk about a threat to democracy. Is there anything more democratic than going to a school board meeting, voicing your concerns about how your tax dollars are being spent to educate your children, especially in the face of things like school lockdowns that were pushing kids years behind in their academic achievements, that were leading to all kinds of abuse in the homes? And then you had this sort of indoctrinating kind of curriculum they were pushing with CRT, and not just CRT, other kinds of things that they're pushing through the school system as well. Parents go and voice their concerns, which is exactly where they should be taking those concerns, and they get labeled as domestic terrorist. What?
Yeah. And then to have the government respond to such an allegation and go investigate them, when, you know what, in almost all of these cases, there was no violence, right? There was disruptive, fierce protest. But again, that's what democracy is all about. And in the rare cases where there was some sort of violence at one of these school board meetings, that's of course not something we support. But it's also not really a federal matter. That would be like a local police matter. Wouldn't be something you need to be calling in the Attorney General of the United States or the FBI to investigate. That clearly is because the people running those agencies right now are on Team Blue, and Team Blue has very much drank the teachers' union Kool-Aid, and views the people who are upset with the status quo of our government education system as not having legitimate concerns and being dangerous radicals, when in fact I think they're a common sense majority fed up with years of nonsense. So I would like to see this investigated. I'd like to know what Merrick Garland was saying behind the scenes. Let's see the emails. Let's get the documents about this. What were the FBI's internal conversations? These are all things I think that the Republicans can and should investigate. And I'd rather see them focus on this kind of thing than get into like Hunter Biden's crack pipes or whatever too much. This seems to me like a higher priority.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that I completely agree. And especially considering what the FBI has done throughout its history, right? This is not the first time that they've tried to come in and label our own citizens who are doing nothing more than participating in their own system as domestic terrorists or threats. We saw them do this to many people under the Red Scare of the 1950s. We saw this with MLK Jr. They often do this, and it is a weaponization of the government against the American people and against basic civil liberties and the basic constitutional rights we're supposed to be afforded. I want to know exactly how much money was spent on this. I want to know what, if any, evidence they had of these people being anything more than a nuisance in their book. Because, yeah, I mean, we've not seen arrests come from this. We've not seen any concrete evidence that there actually was people threatening to, like, say, bomb the schools or something like that. No, it was just people who were angry, and they were vocal, and they were adamant. at these meetings. And that's actually what a lot of us on the ground have been saying for a long time. When people say, like, what do we do about our political system? How do we get involved? What do we say? We say, get involved with your local school board, because it makes such a difference. It has such an impact on all of our lives and on how people come out thinking in the world. And so when they start doing that, they get labeled as domestic terrorists. Absolutely unacceptable. It really turns my stomach to this day. So I'm very hopeful we'll get more into the weeds on that. And I'm hoping that as a result of that investigation, we see heads roll, because that's the other problem, right? Even though we do find out they do these things over time, nothing ever happens to them. There's never any accountability. There's never any actual repercussions for those kinds of violations. So that's top of my list. Second on my list has to be the FBI encouraging Twitter and likely every other social media platform to censor Americans. We have been covering this very heavily at Base Politics. Jack Cunner has particularly been hot on the beat of this. But the Twitter files, which Elon Musk has released, they show concretely that the FBI was sending Twitter specific posts and requesting that they take them down. There was a super incestuous relationship between the FBI and Twitter, with tons of employees moving back and forth, and regular meetings between top Twitter execs and FBI officials as well. So it's got to be the tip of the iceberg, right? If they were doing this to Twitter, we have to know they were doing it to other agencies. I want to know exactly what all those conversations were. I want to know all the background, everything they can possibly dig up on this, because this is probably the biggest violation of the First Amendment that I've seen in our country's history. It's hard to think of anything else that would, compare.
I think I can think of a few to top it.
What would you say?
Like the, what's it called? Sedition acts. Right? Do you remember that? I mean,
yeah, those were bad.
I can think of a few worse things, but that doesn't exactly make this hunky-dory, because think about it. If Elon hadn't bought Twitter, we never would have known about any of this, which really does suggest that it's just the tip of the iceberg. And imagine being one of those people whose random jokes about, if you're a Republican, vote on Tuesday. If you're a Democrat, vote next month, right? Like, your joke tweet with 5 likes was getting emailed from FBI San Francisco to Yoel Roth at Twitter saying, this seems to violate your policies. What are you going to do about it, huh? Like, that's pretty crazy. Both on the front of free speech concerns, but also, like, really? That's what they're spending their time on? Shouldn't they be doing counterterrorism or finding abducted children or something? Like, I think the whole thing is very messed up, and we obviously only know the Twitter side, what they had access to, because that's what Elon has released. I want to know the FBI side, and that's what this investigation could find. But I am curious, Hannah. So those are the two main things we've talked about the Republicans should investigate now that they're in charge of the House. Is there anything else you think that they should investigate? I don't care too much about the Hunter Biden stuff. I get it. It's salacious. And if Joe was involved, that's bad. But to me, I just really struggle to care. I would be interested, though, to see an investigation into the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. I was a big proponent of ending that war, of withdrawing, but Biden did it in this most chaotic and haphazard way, where he didn't get Americans out before pulling the troops, and then had to send them back in to try to evac people. And 13 U.S. soldiers died because of that, because of the way it was handled. And I feel like we've forgotten about that, because so much has happened since then. But I'd like to know how that went down, because not only was that a national tragedy, but also like really hurt the anti-war movement to have something that, like, the anti-interventionist movement, to have something that so many people supported and called for enacted so poorly. And then people blame that, we never should have left Afghanistan. And it's like, no, we should have. We just shouldn't have done it in a way that doesn't seem like it was planned by a mentally unwell senior citizen. Like, I don't know how to describe it other than complete incompetence. So I hope they investigate that too.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to add to the list. And I have to say, it's kind of open-ended from there, because these are just the things that we already sort of knew, suspected, have gotten some proof of. God knows what else these people have been doing behind the scenes that hasn't come to light yet, that we've no evidence of, that could just slowly blindside us. So I want just a thorough investigation into their activities, carte blanche. I think that they need a top to bottom review, and then I hope we see serious policy reforms flow from that. I am a little bit pessimistic, I guess, about the American people's propensity to care for this very long, because we've seen whistleblowers, like Edward Snowden, come out and give tons of information about how these agencies are violating our privacy, for one example. And unfortunately, a lot of Americans just kind of go, and keep it moving. So It's bizarre to me, but they do. So I'm hopeful that like there is enough, again, bipartisan buy-in to this to get people to really care about these issues, because you should care. You know, if you love everything the Biden administration is doing, and you know those are your people, you have to know that if they're doing this under Biden, that will happen to your people on your side the minute there's a Republican in office. So you have to care about when it's being done to your political enemies too. And I just want to get that energy back into this country.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you completely on the importance of that consistency, which is why we've been covering and talking about a big Trump policy that just got struck down by federal courts, because people don't seem to realize this often. You think Republicans, pro-gun, Democrats, anti-gun, but Trump actually enacted one of the most significant pieces of gun control that we have had in some time during his presidency. So basically, if you remember, they, after this terrible shooting in Las Vegas in 2017, they tried to ban bump stocks, which the real simplistic way of explaining it is an accessory that helps increase the firing rate of a semi-automatic firearm. And under the Trump administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, they went and tried to unilaterally ban them just by rewriting the rules and reinterpreting old federal laws. They couldn't get that passed through Congress. You'd think you'd need a bill for that, right? But Trump was like, no, we're just going to do it. We'll just enact a new rule, reinterpret the old laws. And they claimed that the accessory was actually banned because a machine gun is banned under federal law already, a fully automatic weapon. Now, the distinction there is that if a fully automatic weapon, if you pull the trigger and hold it, it keeps shooting bullets rapid fire. A semi-automatic weapon, which is legal and is popular, is one trigger pull, one bullet. Now, bump stock just helps you pull the trigger faster by reharnessing your momentum, and it was used in this terrible shooting. Now, they just tried to ban it and rewrite the old laws and ditch a decades-long interpretation, and now that's been struck down by a federal appeals court. And I think that's great. You know, I think if it was a Biden policy that had been struck down, you would have seen a lot more people talking about it in right-wing media. But because it was a Trump policy, didn't make so many headlines.
Yeah, they kind of like to bury the fact that Trump passed more gun control than Obama and pretty much every Democrat in recent memory. So I was always very annoyed with this. It was always a super unconstitutional way of going about it. Not only was he an enemy of the Second Amendment, he also did it in a way that was a direct attack on our basic processes and laws. And he should never have gotten a pass for that. And I think part of the reason he did is that a bump stock's a pretty obscure piece of equipment. Like, I'm kind of a gun nut. I carry a gun. I worked for Second Amendment groups. I'd never heard of bump stocks until this whole controversy came about. They're kind of a weird mechanism. I think, as you have in our show notes, you could literally replicate what they do with a rubber band. So
if you really know what you're doing.
Yeah. It's sort of an inconsequential thing to most people that they got banned, but I think it should have gotten more criticism than it did. I'm glad to see the court strike it down, not only because I don't support gun control, but because of the way they went about it. It was such a violation of the Constitution. And if again, if you'll do it for this kind of thing, if you'll violate the Bill of Rights, violate the basic processes to get this, then you set the precedent for other people to do it in other ways and to do bigger things. So it should have gotten a lot more criticism. The courts tend to be pretty good on these things. I continue to feel like courts are our last refuge in this country, where they're really holding the line for us a lot of the time. So
yeah, I agree with you on the I don't really care about bump stocks one way or the other. I have no skin in that, and also it's not the end of the world, right? It's just not that huge a policy. But what was disturbing was the way that they did it was essentially like 1984 style reinterpreting of old language, because they couldn't pass a new law. They're like, oh, well, we'll just go find in the old laws this new ability for the government to unilaterally ban something. And if they can do that with bump stocks and the ATF, they can do that with healthcare, they can do that with the environment, and they do that, to be clear, actually. But that's part of what the courts and the conservative and libertarian legal movement has been fighting against, this rogue, unaccountable bureaucracy. Not because the executive branch is supposed to enforce our laws, but we've come to the point where we have this massive, bloated regulatory state on everything from food to guns to housing to healthcare, where they actually just make up new rules and interpret vague statutes in new and novel ways, and we can't keep up. they have every incentive to overregulate stuff, to expand their own power and influence. And more importantly, they're unaccountable to the people. Nobody voted for the bureaucrats at the ATF. We voted for our members of Congress. And if any new laws or policies are going to happen, they should have to be passed by the people who actually answer to us. And so I was glad to see the court stick up for this. And I think the Supreme Court, even though it's 6-3 conservatives, I think they will not take up this case and like reverse the decision. If they take it at all, I think they'd affirm it.
I think you're right. And I have to have sort of a moment of bragging here. Back in 2016, when I was first getting into politics, which I always set this out when I first decided to move from music into politics, I said, I will never work somewhere I'm not completely aligned, because I never wanted to like sell out my principles or my values. And almost immediately once I started moving into politics full time, NRA TV contacted me, and they were interviewing me to be a personality, which I really wanted to do. That was like a dream job for me. And so I went through all these interviews with them, and then it finally got time. They wanted to start doing some test episodes, and they said, okay, we're going to have you call into this show, and you're going to talk about why it's so important to support Trump, and why he's so good for the Second Amendment. And I was like, I cannot do that. I was like, I'm not supporting Trump, and I think he's atrocious on the Second Amendment, and like, I can't do it. And I basically lost that job because I wouldn't go stump for Trump. But look who was right all along. It was me batting 1,000, and I'm so glad that I didn't sell out.
Has gone bankrupt.
And they're being sued, and like, yeah, that was God's protection over my life. So. Well, since we're talking about Trump, and since we're talking a little bit about 2016, let's move it on to Hillary Clinton, because our favorite, jailbird, Hillary Clinton has been on a stick since 2016 that Russia stole the election from her. She has never let it go, honey. She will never let it die. Let's roll this clip of her briefly.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did. And I take responsibility for those parts of it that I should. But Jane, it was like applying for a job and getting 66 million letters of recommendation and losing to a corrupt human tornado. And so I know that he knows that this wasn't on the level. I don't know that we'll ever know everything that happened, but clearly we know a lot and are learning more every day, and history will probably sort it all out.
So that was from 2019, right? She's still out here saying this.
She keeps it going, man. She is just hung up on this. And because of that, a lot of other Democrats have been as well. Many people in the media have kept this narrative going. A lot of people online will still talk about this. Many of their supporters still believe that they literally think Russia stole the election for Trump in 2016. It's like the biggest conspiracy on the left that never gets called out. Polling actually says 72% of Democrats believe the election outcome in 2016 was changed by Russian interference.
Bruh.
Like, that is wild to me. Jack actually reported for this at Base Politics for us. He said a 2-year probe conducted by Robert Mueller proved Democrats' Russian collusion conspiracy theory not to be true. The recent release of Trump's tax returns also showed it not to be true. But now, even the Washington Post is coming out and saying, it's not true. Tim Starks reported. Yeah. Tim Starks reported on Monday, Russian influence operations on Twitter in the 2016 presidential election reached relatively few users, most of whom were highly partisan Republicans, and the Russian accounts had no measurable impact in changing minds or influencing voter behavior, according to a study out this morning. The study, which the New York University Center for Social Media and Politics helmed, explores the limits of what Russian disinformation and misinformation was able to achieve on one major social media platform in the 2016 elections, the Post reported. And they continued by saying that many details and statistics, but the grand takeaway and WAPO's headline is that the Russian trolls on Twitter had little influence on 2016 voters, and that tells us fairly conclusively that at least on Twitter, the minimal amount of interference Russia committed also had a minimal influence on the election. And Brad, you put this meme in here. That's one of the things. That's one of the things Russia paid for.
Russia did try to interfere in the 2016 election. Like, we know this, and they did so with like bots and social media accounts, and but it was like very small and laughably ineffective. So, like you just heard there, most of the people reached with this messaging were already hardcore Republicans who were going to vote for Trump and against Hillary. But there's this meme that they was paid for by Russia that says, Satan, if I win, Clinton wins. And Jesus says, not if I can help it. So the meme suggests like Hillary's on team Satan, Trump is on team Jesus. And I'm like, this is the kind of thing they were pushing out there. And it's like, show me, find me one, even a single swing state, battleground, independent voter who was swayed by that to pull the lever for Trump instead of Hillary.
No.
You can't. And the whole thing was much ado about nothing all along. Of course, it's bad that they try to mess in our elections. It's bad that we mess in other countries' elections, too. But it never had any sort of wide-scale impact, and it was always just an excuse for Hillary's giant fat L instead of looking in the mirror.
I feel like the over-under on one of my older relatives having shared this exact meme is pretty high. Like, I feel very certain. This is definitely some uncle Facebook material. If you have Republican uncles, like, this is up their alley. It's very funny. But no, it didn't sway anybody. Nobody saw this and was like, ooh, definitely better go support Trump now. No, this, like, appealed to people who are already pretty fringy in that camp. So the whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous. And Hillary needs to take all the seats, take her L, and leave us alone, please.
They'll never admit it. They'll never admit the real reasons they lost, but yet they'll come and say that Republicans are a threat to democracy and they're election deniers. Or Hillary Clinton is an election denier. She still says Trump was illegitimately elected. It was Russia that stole the election. And she's never really walked back all that, although she did concede on election night, unlike Trump. But that's like a very low bar to clear, and clearly they're guilty for a lot of the same kind of fact-free election fear-mongering that they constantly moan about the Republicans about. And it just makes it hard to take any of them seriously if they're actually telling us that Jesus, Satan, boomer cringe memes would have made the difference, based on Russia. And then the accounts, too. You look at, like, oh, they got thousands of engagements. And you and I who do social media know that, like, that on Twitter, that's nothing. We get millions per month, and neither of us are particularly huge accounts. Like, we're medium-sized accounts, right? So in the grand, also Twitter is not relevant, like, to the election, because a tiny percentage of Americans even uses Twitter, and the ones that are on there are usually already hardcore on one side or the other. Not a lot of, like, middle of the road swing people on there. So they're not exactly swayable. So the whole thing is just a joke. I hope this will finally be the end of it, but I don't think it will.
I don't think so. They're going to keep it going. All right, let's move on to our friend up north, Jordan Peterson. It appears he is in some hot water in Canada.
Yeah, so this is a really, frankly, like, disturbing story that I came across this week. So Jordan Peterson, I don't always agree with him on everything. He's gone down a little bit of a different path lately with some takes I don't agree with, but he made it big as a clinical psychologist talking about self-improvement and helping a lot of young men get their lives together. And he approached things from a human psychology lens because of his background as a clinical psychologist. Now, he has become, I think, more political, and he's outspoken on more culture war issues. Very controversial. He first made it big because the university he was teaching at was trying to mandate the use of transgender students' pronouns, and he took a stand that I won't on free speech grounds. And so that was his first thing when he blew up. But now he's become, in many ways, a right-wing intellectual and commentator, and so he said some controversial things. What's disturbing, though, is what's happening now is the governing body that licenses clinical psychologists in Ontario, but backed by the government, the College of Psychologists of Ontario, is demanding that he acknowledge that he, quote-unquote, lacked professionalism in public statements and that he undergo a coaching program of remedial education, as the Wall Street Journal put it. They're investigating him for his tweets and his comments on Joe Rogan, because apparently people have time and time again just mass reported him to this regulatory body to try to get his license revoked. And a panel from this organization says the comments at issue appear to undermine the public trust in the profession as a whole and raise questions about your ability to carry out your responsibilities as a psychologist. But Hannah,
What
I know
did he say?
Yeah, look, you tell us, right? We have the list right here of these shocking and terrible things he said.
Let's jump in. I mean, and I want to clarify, I'm with you too. Like, I feel like I used to really like Jordan Peterson. I read his book when it came out, The 12 Rules for Life, found a lot of value in it. He's become kind of a right-wing provocateur more and more so recently, and I feel like he's kind of getting that audience capture thing where he has been saying, like, edgier and edgier stuff where it's just, I don't know, it feels off-brand for what his message was. He used to be somebody who seemed more uplifting, So I'm going to dig into this, but I just want to say, like, I have noticed a change in him. But regardless, there is no excuse for this kind of investigation into somebody. I don't care what they said. That's crazy. So first we have, they accused him of joking about suicide because he tweeted at someone who was concerned about Earth's overpopulation. And the tweet, original tweet said, based on the record of human behavior, we are already overpopulating this small world. Any arguments I have heard for supporting such a large human population completely overlook the huge loss of species and ecosystems resulting from our self-absorbed attention. He quote tweeted it and said, "You're free to leave at any point."
And now the people who complained said that he was joking and encouraging suicide. Like, give me a break.
First and foremost, I used to run a Facebook group called Dark Mental Health Humor that had tons of people in there that had suicidal ideology and depression. And guess what? We found it supremely helpful to make jokes about suicide and mental health. That is a good way to cope. Like, get out of here. I cannot stand these wussies. Stupid.
He also, they're mad that he called a Justin Trudeau government official a prick. And that he shared posts questioning COVID mandates and policies.
There it is.
And of course, you know, that gets you on the no list. Now, this one, I didn't like this thing that he posted. Doesn't mean he should lose his license, but I did not like this one.
Oh, so I remember this. He shared a plus-size Sports Illustrated model cover and said, "Not beautiful." Which is mean, but, like, I didn't agree with him, but, like, it's kind of, I mean, like,
I thought she was beautiful. Now, she's not fit and healthy, necessarily. But she's also not, like, 500 pounds, like some of these people. She's definitely a little bit overweight.
Like, beauty is subjective. Somebody could share a picture of me and be like, "Not beautiful." Like, and I'm sure they do. People come back to their looks all the time. Like, they do. So, like, get over it.
So his whole thing was like, he's not going to start believing that being overweight is beautiful just because the woke people want us to. And I get that. I wouldn't have put it so crassly, right? And gone after this random model. But a lot of people were pointing out that he's like this old, sickly, thin white dude. Like,
it's always the Ogo men online with something to say about other people's looks. Never have I ever seen a hot man online commenting on other people's looks. Not once, not ever.
But so I thought that wasn't the greatest tweet, right? But it really doesn't have anything to do with how he's treated his patients. And that's what your license should be about. If you're getting referred for professional misconduct, it should be like, all these people complaining weren't his patients. They never worked with him. And if you had a bad experience, or he was, like, in some way incompetent in your care or neglectful in your care, that's the kind of thing that should be reported. Not like, his tweet hurt my fifis. Like, what?
Yeah. Oh, and then lastly, I do remember this. He actually got canceled on Twitter for this. Like, Twitter took his account down, but he referred to the transgender actress Elliot Page by his former dead name, Ellen Page, and said a doctor was criminal for performing a double mastectomy on a healthy female body. Again, don't agree with him. This is one of the areas where I'm just like, why are you so anti-trans all of a sudden? Like, I don't get it. But it has nothing to do with how you treat people. And it really should come down to that. And that's something that the market can handle. If enough people don't want to see a therapist who's anti-trans, he won't work anyway. It's like, the free market can more than handle that. And if he doesn't get canceled for it, then it's not your business. Like, move along.
Yeah, and I will say, like, his comments on trans stuff just kind of, he believes people can't change their sex, can't change their gender. That is, whether people on the left like it or not, a widely held view. Mm-hmm. And just trying to act like it's beyond the pale, it's not. And this idea of a dead name is, look, I would be respectful to somebody who's changed their name and used their new name in most circumstances, I think. But it's not like, why is it that we're supposed to, like, this word is dead now? You can't say the name Bruce Jenner on Twitter. That will get you in trouble, as if this person didn't go by that name for decades and literally win an Olympic medal. Like, Caitlyn Jenner is fine with you talking about Bruce Jenner in reference to her past. Like, we've gone in this overcorrection of you can't even say these things when this is actually widely held views. But let's just be honest. And it's really nothing extreme or crazy. And so you don't have to agree with it, but it's hardly a beyond the pale statement. And more importantly, like we talked about, These aren't accusations from clients that have been mistreated, trying to get Jordan Peterson's license taken away by this Canadian body. These are just people accusing him of wrongthink and wrong speak because their fifis were hurt by his tweets. And they also submitted his entire 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan and just said, all of this is a violation of professional conduct. So the fact that this body is going along with this farce and coming after him, he is putting up a fight, releasing all of it, going after them. He may lose his license. I really don't know. It looks like he might, but good for him for standing up against this, because I think it's just insane.
Well, and per usual, people need to be well aware of how little free speech you actually have in places like Canada and London, very Western places that are just so regressive, so authoritarian, and this is what many on the left are pushing for here in the United States. So this is why we are such stringent free speech advocates. You really cannot give an inch to these people, because you will end up getting brought before people for wrongthink, basically, and having your livelihood taken away if they get their wishes, which is terrifying. Okay, let's move on to the mailbag. What do we have up first? Looks like Matthew Bauer. He said, the third party in our two-party system doesn't work. You will never get enough influence to do anything. You are way better off picking a side. Well, I disagree wholeheartedly with that. And I will say it's not that a third party couldn't work in our two-party system. It's that the two parties have rigged the laws to block third parties, my dude. Look into it.
Yeah. It's not as if they've had an open competition and failed, right? It's very much been closed off. And also, it's like, people will say this in response to people who advance libertarian ideas or whatever, and that's fine, but I'm not particularly vested in the Libertarian Party. And even if you don't win, you elect a Libertarian, capital L, president, you move people on issues. Like, think about marijuana, gay marriage, foreign policy, criminal justice reform. All these things are libertarian ideas that have essentially dragged the other two parties toward them in recent years by convincing the public. So that's what I'm more concerned about. 2 parties, 3 parties, 5 parties. My ideal world, we'd have 6 to 8 parties, right? But I don't really care so much about all that.
Parties.
Well, I don't think it's possible, really. It'd be nice. But yeah, I think we care more about changing the body politic, and then the parties will have to eventually reflect it. So yeah. Robert said, I think you two are really great. Haven't listened to any of your takes that I've been able to disagree with. I think I'm going to start calling myself a Polumbo Cox libertarian. I don't think people will know what you mean, but that's still very nice of you.
Get it going.
And I will say, one of these days, you probably will listen to one of our takes that you disagree with or don't like. And I appreciate it when people... This will happen to us semi-regularly, or to me especially, where like a person who really likes our content with just one thing, they just will think we're wrong or just not like or disagree, and they'll send me a note about it. And I always appreciate it, as long as it's just like, this is my feedback, as long as it's not super aggressive or anything. I'm always open to it, so...
I mean, you and I don't agree on everything either, so... I think there's room in there for disagreement. We agree on most things, but not everything. No. Ryan says, I love this podcast. Hannah and Brad never change. I'm a massive football fan, and the collapse by Damar Hamlin made me turn my head. Prayers for his recovery. Matt Walsh's critique of libertarianism is laughable. He knows nothing of libertarianism. We agree. If the right had any clue on their own history, they are not too libertarian. They are too authoritarian. They should have listened to Barry Goldwater in the 80s on the religious right and on basic rights for everyone. Hard to disagree with that.
Yeah. So Thin White Axe says, congrats on the soccer win, Brad. May you not get kicked out of this team for wrong. Now, for folks that don't understand the context of that, I was actually kicked off a gay men's soccer team in DC because all the liberal... I never talked politics. I just played soccer, and I was very friendly and nice to everyone. But some of the liberal gays on the team, they said that they felt unsafe playing with me. That my presence endangered their safety because I have argued publicly that I don't believe in child transition for gender dysphoric youth. I don't believe in medical and surgical transition for minors, which is a mainstream opinion and I think perfectly legitimate. But they said that my presence on the team made hypothetical future transgender members unsafe. And so I was not welcome there anymore. And the funny thing is, since then, I have played soccer with almost exclusively heterosexual men and been much more accepted. Not had any issue.
I feel like you've had such bizarre consequences for your political beliefs and like being out front and center that I'm sorry. I hate it happened to you, but it's kind of funny. Like,
yeah. Well, because in fairness, I lived in bubbles that were really far left. First UMass Amherst and then DC. So that is what you expect. But the second half of his comment is directed at you, Hannah.
Let me read it. He says, also, I normally don't wish ill on anyone, but as a Georgia Bulldogs fan, when Hannah said roll tide, it did cross my mind that maybe you deserve Phoenix crapping on your carpet. And since we're number one in the SEC and y'all aren't, I'll be gracious and say, no, you didn't. Good luck with the potty training. Well, I will say congratulations on your massive victory last night in the championship. That was a good game. I mean, it wasn't a good game because Georgia just crushed them, but good for Georgia. And I tend to have this thing where whenever Alabama's not playing, if it's a former Alabama coaching, I cheer for that team. So I like Kirby Smart. So yeah, I'll take it. And honestly, right now, I'd take Phoenix crapping on my carpet for anything.
Oh, that's this comment turned unexpectedly sad. All right, so Nancy, and I think this was an insult, but I put it in here because I thought it was funny, wrote, bless your tiny little hearts, which...
What was this on?
This was on our Matt Walsh video, so I imagine she's probably they call him Daddy Walsh, which makes me uncomfortable.
I don't like that at all.
So she said, bless your tiny little hearts, and I'm like... Bless your heart is kind of like maybe you'd know this better. Is it like a Southern thing? It's like passive aggressive, like bless your heart.
But then
the thing we have little hearts, I guess.
Little tiny hearts. I don't know. People always say it's like a slight down here in the South. Like I think it's dying out. Like I don't actually hear people say it non-ironically. Like they'll say it sort of like in this kind of context, and that's it. So. I don't know. Tim Smith said, I so appreciate the comments that you guys made regarding the vaccines. Thank you. I wish more commentators would be so sane. Well, I appreciate that because we got hella feedback in our DMs over that. Many people did not like what we had to say about the vaccines, but we try to be nuanced, try to be as even-minded as we possibly can. So we thought it was important to speak out on that. All right. Shall we move on to hot takes?
Yes.
I don't have any spice in me. I'm too sad. My hot take is I'm so glad there's good veterinarians and 24/7 care for little puppies that eat things.
Well, now mine feels not so
you
deep
can bring
by
the spice.
comparison. Well, mine is just I have some thoughts about pizza, and I really have decided, there's two types of pizza, broadly speaking. There's like deep dish and like thin crust pizza. Oh. Right?
Yeah.
And I just think deep dish pizza is just so superior. And so much more, like when I hear, pizza, and then it comes out and it's like a flatbread, I'm like 9 out of 10 times disappointed. So that's my take. I'm sticking to it. That deep dish pizza is superior.
Do you want to hear something kind of sad? I'm with you on that, but you can't really get gluten-free deep dish pizza. It just doesn't, the kinds of flour that's used just doesn't rise the same. So I always get stuck with thin crust now, even when I can find gluten-free pizza, and it is inferior. It's very sad. All right, guys, that's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Leave us a comment. We might read it on air. And until next week, stay based.